Ay, a ver. Listo. Entonces, comenzamos esta transmisión que no fue muy publicitada porque pues cosas que pasan, pero tenemos una presentación desde el Instituto de Investigaciones Filosóficas. Y Selene Arfini nos hablará sobre filosofía de la ignorancia. Va a estar muy interesante en esta transmisión sorpresa de bestias proposicionales. En un momento comenzamos.
It's a pleasure. Make sure that the camera sees you, so that's, yeah. Hola a todos, muchas gracias por estar el día de hoy con nosotros. Ella es Selene Arfini. Selene ha trabajado muy arduamente durante los últimos 10 años investigando tanto aspectos de la racionalidad humana como aspectos de la racionalidad científica, y en particular uno de sus temas más centrales de su investigación siempre ha sido la ignorancia. Entonces, el trabajo de el trabajo de Selene en general está informado tanto por la epistemología tradicional como por ciencias cognitivas. Entonces nos da mucho gusto tenerla aquí. El posgrado en filosofía de la ciencia ha hecho el favor de patrocinar a través de la solicitud de Miguel Ángel Sebastián que Selene esté con nosotros ahora. Esta es su última actividad y nos da mucho gusto contar con esta audiencia el día de hoy. Selene va a hablar por algo así como 1 hora, pero si tienen preguntas y si los estudiantes en particular tienen preguntas que quieran hacer en español, pueden hacerlas e interrumpir. Y si no, de todos modos, estamos reservando algo así como 50 minutos para la ronda de preguntas y respuestas. The floor is yours.
So thanks so much, Maria, for inviting me. Thank you, all of you, for being here. As Maria said, please interrupt me anytime if you have question notes. I'm probably going to ask you some questions during the talk. If you don't want any question asked before the Q&A, tell me now. I will not present you, I promise. I'm just I get very bored with the sound of my voice, and sometimes I want to hear someone else. For those of you who were not here yesterday and Tuesday for the crash course, I need to say that I know that I have a very heavy Italian accent. So if you don't understand something, it's not your problem, it's mine. So please tell me, and I'm going to repeat, or I'm going to change some words. I'm going to rephrase some what I was going to say in order to make it clearer. So, okay, if I can start, I'm going to say I'm going to start with an anecdote, because as Maria said, I've been studying ignorance since the first year of my PhD course. So it has been some time that I go to conferences or I meet people in formal and informal meetings, and I say, well, I deal with ignorance. The first thing that comes to mind when people hear this is, okay, she has a lot of material then. She's going to talk about a lot of stuff that are timely and something like this. And in many ways, this is true. I mean, ignorance is a very popular notion in today's time, is a very popular notion in pop culture, is a very popular notion mainly outside of academia. We talk about ignorance every time we refer to the concept of fake news. We talk about ignorance when we talk about conspiracy theories. We talk about ignorance every time someone names post-truth, even though nobody or almost nobody knows what post-truth actually means. And I mean, it's true that ignorance is very popular right now, but we have still a very narrow understanding of what actually ignorance means inside of academia, while we are dealing with that from a philosophical point of view. Indeed, every time we refer to ignorance, we deal with a very neat distinction. We discuss ignorance as one extreme of two poles. So we put ignorance on one side and knowledge on the other. And this is not a fair equation. We don't think that the two poles are equal. In many ways, when we refer to knowledge, we also refer to rationality, we also refer to coherence, we also refer to competence, we also refer to merit. Every time we think about ignorance, we do the opposite. We are going to talk about the rationality of beliefs. We are going to talk about incompetence. We are going to talk about blame. In many ways, ignorance is something to be blamed for, and and something that we use to blame others. And this duality, this strict duality, in many sense, can be rethought if we try to understand ignorance from a broader perspective and from, well, spending some time with the concept of ignorance. Indeed, some questions that may emerge are: is there not a rational way to be ignorant? Or sometimes are we not productively ignorant? Are we not ignorant, conscious to be ignorant, and we are fine with that? So this question were taken seriously by different people in academia, different scholars who compose what we now call ignorance studies. Ignorance studies is an umbrella term that describe any kind of theory or concept or discussion regarding ignorance from mainly an interdisciplinary point of view. It is not only philosophy, it is not only cognitive science or sociology, it's a mix of all the disciplines that in part deal with cognition and in part deal with culture, and so they deal also with ignorance. Now, in the next 50 minutes, more or less, I'm going to talk a bit about how exactly in ignorance studies we moved from a dualistic conception of ignorance and knowledge to a more nuanced perspective. We're going to see that there are many ways in which we can be productively, rationally, or even happily ignorant. And at the same time, we are going to face at the very end of the talk some problematic question regarding knowledge, regarding the fact that maybe not all knowledge is, not all knowledge should be pursued, not all knowledge should be achieved, and we should discuss exactly where we put the distinction between good knowledge and problematic ones. Anyway, in order to do all that, we need some models. We need something to start the conversation. And in order to do that, one of the most famous models of ignorance that has been not only proposed in the literature, but also defended, used, and in many ways reconstructed, was not a model that was presented by a philosopher, but it was presented by a politician. In particular, it was presented by this man. Yeah, it's not a very nice man, but yes. Donald Rumsfeld was the Secretary of Defense in 2002. And in that year, he found himself in the problematic position of defending the invasion of Iraq from the point of view of the United States. He wanted to defend this, well, let's say problematic, not to say anything else, political move, and because they didn't find weapon of mass destruction in Iraq. So in order to defend this position, Donald Rumsfeld began to say, reports that say that something hasn't happened are always interesting to me, because as we know, there are no knowns. There are things that we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things that we do not know. Finally, there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. And if one looks throughout the history of our country and other three countries, it is the latter category that tends to be the difficult ones. Now, let's let's go over, let's not talk about the cowardly defense of the political view that Rankosville offered. And let's focus on the model of ignorance that he proposed. Because the model of ignorance is quite good, it's quite interesting at least. Because if we think about knowledge and ignorance as two poles of one particular model, then we can get some nuances in this model by thinking not only of the epistemic state that we are in, but of the attitude we have toward that epistemic state, or the second order beliefs that we have toward that epistemic state. So we divide again the polar opposite, and we have what he called known knowns, unknown knowns, known unknowns, and unknown unknowns. This seems kind of funny. This seems kind of neat as a distinction. It gets complicated when we ask, in a sense, a very simple question: where is knowledge now? Because first we had knowledge on one side and ignorance on the other side, and we, at least from an epistemological perspective, we said, well, at least they are equal in that regard. They are not equal in an ethical perspective. They are not equal since we value them differently, but they are equal in the respect that when you have no knowledge, at least you are ignorant, and when you are not ignorant, you have knowledge. Now something has changed. And if I can ask you, where should we put knowledge? Where would you say it is? The top part. The top one, both, or this one? Oh, it doesn't work. That one, right? Both of them. Both. It's a nice answer. I mean, also the bottom looks good, right? I mean, unknown knowns. I mean, we don't know that we know, basically. That's what. And known unknowns, we know at least that we don't know something. Knowledge seems to cover some part, at least, of this model. But if I want to take the knowledge with the capital K, the knowledge above all else, the knowledge that we can defend as knowledge, where should we put it?
No one knows.
No one knows. I mean, it's a good answer. It's a very straightforward answer in many ways. We know that we are at peace in that particular regard. We have explicit knowledge, and we know, for example, if I say I don't know, I think I know the capital of Italy, but I'm not sure if it is Rome, I would not claim my knowledge as a known element. I would need to be sure of my knowledge to call it so. If we think that knowledge with the capital K is on that corner, then ignorance seems to occupy, in a sense, more space. Because the other parts, well, the known unknowns and the unknown knowns, seems kind of sketchy. For example, if I were to learn Spanish and I was at the very beginning of that learning process, well, probably my knowledge would be tacit. So I would have just an idea, vague idea of what I would have of the fact that I knew, for example, how to, I don't know, call a cab or order something in a restaurant. I would not call my knowledge explicit. On the other hand, we have at least two types of ignorance that are very much problematic in a way. On the one hand, we have known unknowns, so the many things that we know we don't know. On the other hand, we have an uncountable, something that we can refer to as limited in a way. Because if I think about every single thing that I don't know, well, I could not count them, I could not do anything with them. So in terms of in terms of size, just size, that corner looks really isolated. We have a very specific size that is narrow and is just dedicated to what we call knowledge with a capital K. And ignorance instead is more broader in many ways. In order to, well, get a grip over the distinction between known unknowns and unknown unknowns, we can also use another distinction. We can put some other layers to this model. One layer corresponds to the difference between limit and limitation. I'm not sure if in Spanish there is a similar kind of distinction. I know that in Italian there is a distinction between a limite and una limitazione. I'm curious regarding if you know or if you can guess what this distinction is. So what is a limit and what is a limitation? I see a lot of people doing that.
Yes,
Please
yes.
tell me.
Yes, you know, we have that.
What is a limit? Okay.
discussion.
What is a limit and what is a limitation?
Limitation is something someone has, no?
Yeah.
A limit seems to be someone that we don't share. No?
I like this very much. It's not going to be in the next slide, but I think you are correct on that regard. A limit is not just an individual problem in many ways. We're going to say that ignorance as a limit can be an individual problem, but it becomes a collective problem if we adopt a social perspective on it. I'm getting ahead of myself. For now, it's absolutely correct that a limitation is something that someone has or that is affected by. We can go deeper.
But can I say something? A
Yes.
limit might not be a problem. A limitation perhaps is always a problem, but a limit not a problem. We have limits. There's a limit of human knowledge.
Yeah.
That is not a problem for humans because it has to do with things that are beyond, I mean, our expectations, the meaning of life, and the value of life, whatever. So it's not always a problem.
I agree with you. It is not always a problem. I will also argue that also ignorance as a limitation is not always a problem. I'm going to get there at the very end. Ignorance as a limit can represent a terrible problem, but I mean, let's not anticipate too much. Diene. Yeah.
I was thinking like in a mathematic way, maybe.
Yeah.
Since it constrains how much you can go far or
Fantastic.
something, and limitation is more like referred to an ability or an obstacle that you can maybe overcome.
I could not ask for a better definition for both of them. On the one hand, we have a limit, which is something that we cannot overcome. As you said, in mathematical reasoning, we have limits, we don't have limitation. I mean, we have limitation in mathematical reasoning in many sense, but we use the term limits, at least in mathematical lexicon. And a limitation is something that, well, it's imposed by someone else, by ourselves. It is something that we can overcome. Just to make a very simple example of both of them, if I say well, one of my limits is that I cannot fly on my own. It's because I don't have wings. This is a limit. It's not something that I can overcome. If I say I've eaten too much of lunch, I cannot run, well, I should just wait 2 hours and I can overcome this limitation. Now, ignorance as a limit and ignorance as a limitation gives us a bit of meat to chew in order to discuss exactly how we can step from an idea of ignorance as something that is purely negative and problematic to something that is more nuanced. Let's start with the less problematic one. Let's start with ignorance as a limitation. Ignorance as a limitation can be many things. One of the most popular type of ignorance, one type of ignorance that we sometimes associate with a blameworthy kind of ignorance is what has been called in the literature willful ignorance. Basically, we choose to be ignorant or remain ignorant about something. There are authors, among them there are also Rick Beals and Martin Blau, who have associated this kind of ignorance, willful ignorance, to what they call irrational beliefs or irrational reasoning, which after 2 days of dedicated to rationality, we can call not irrational, but at least self-defeating. And just to make some example of this self-defeating reasoning, we can refer to epistemic aphasia, wishful thinking, and self-deception. Can I ask if anyone is familiar with the term aphasia or epistemic aphasia? What would you say it is?
Appreciate like this incapacity to self-cover.
Okay, fantastic. Now, in a very simple manner, we can call it weakness of will. We cannot step out of our comfort zone in order to make an effort. Now, ignorance and willful ignorance comes into the picture of epistemic aphasia, because, for example, I can be a smoker, a really heavy smoker, and I know that in order to quit, I would need to make some sacrifice. I would need to sacrifice, for example, my time with other smokers. I would need to have terrible days in which I crave nicotine. I don't want to do any of that. I'm a slob, I'm a terrible and lazy person. I don't want even to think about that. So I don't get information about the danger of smoking. I don't get information about how to quit. I don't get information about what steps would I need to do in order to quit. In that sense, I am willfully ignorant, and I am in a situation of epistemic aphasia. Epistemic aphasia is not doing me any favor. I mean, it's a self-defeating reasoning, because it plays against the agent. But in this sense, I'm using ignorance in order to feed one of my motivation, one of my goals. Now, wishful thinking, it must be more common, it must be more known, right? So why do we think that ignorance is involved in wishful thinking? And I'm asking you a question. I don't pretend. I don't need straight and correct answer. I don't need. Okay.
I see no connection.
This is a good point. So why should we connect wishful thinking to ignorance? What is wishful thinking?
When you want to believe something
Yeah.
because it's convenient for you or whatever.
Fantastic. Yes.
I see it connected to ignorance. If you think of wishful thinking, something akin to epistemic biases, or I mean something that limits or bypasses or some obstructs knowledge. So ignorance is not only not knowing things, but only not making knowledge happen. So in this sense,
Fantastic.
wishful thinking is a form of self-deception, or is a form in which you are believing that reality is the way that is. And in that sense, maybe it's not ignoring you are ignoring reality in favor of a constructed reality that suits your wishes.
Fantastic. I mean, if I really am wishful thinking, I am following just one belief and ignoring the rest. So if I am very delusional and I think that I can be at the airport of Mexico City in 1 hour from any place in the city, I can be in a state of wishful thinking. But in order to do so, I would need to ignore what Maria said to me basically all week about the traffic of Mexico City. I would need to ignore Google that tells me that I'm not going to make it there in just an hour. I would need to ignore a lot of stuff. In many ways, wishful thinking comes with a sort of confirmation bias that makes me look at some evidence in favor of my belief and makes me ignoring all the rest. Self-deception in many ways is more controversial because there is a huge literature on self-deception, and this literature basically is contrasted in which way exactly we can deceive ourselves, and if self-deception is actually possible or not. In the literature on ignorance studies, self-deception is connected to a state of willful ignorance, because if it exists, so if we can say that a person is self-deceiving himself or herself, we are saying basically that a person is believing two very different things. Is believing A and is believing not A. So, for example, I can believe that my husband is completely loyal to me, and at the same time, I find, I don't know, stains of lipstick on his shirt. I smell a strange perfume whenever he comes into a room. I at least suspect that he's cheating on me. And if that suspect becomes at least very reasonable, I am dealing with two very different beliefs. On the one hand, he's completely loyal to me. On the other hand, he's cheating on me. Ignorance comes into the picture if I keep this tension going and I ignore some evidence and I start saying, well, I'm not going, for example, to his place of work because I don't want to see what's there. In this sense, willful ignorance, if it comes with self-defeating reasoning, causes epistemic vulnerability, or at least can cause epistemic vulnerability. What I mean by epistemic vulnerability? Basically, if you are starting ignoring some information and this ignoring some information is not doing you any good, because, for example, it would not allow me to catch my plane tomorrow evening, well, I'm also prey of other kind of reasoning that could use my ignorance, my willful ignorance, against me. In this sense, ignorance as a limitation can be seen not only as a limitation that I impose on myself, but also a limitation that others can impose on me. This particular type of ignorance has been studied by the area of ignorance studies that is called agnotology. Agnotology basically is devoted to understanding what comes with ignorance as a product that some people can create for others. So ignorance in this sense is created when we think of particularly well-designed fake news that is designed in order to deceive someone, or particularly well-constructed conspiracy theories. In other ways, it can be constructed not just as a false belief that we spread, but also by relying on doubt. What has been called doubt mongering in this literature is basically the idea that in order to spread a particular kind of ignorance, we can just rely on the fact that for some contexts, in some topics, we just need to spread a well-described doubt. In order to discuss doubt mongering, we can rely on some well-known example. For instance, the doubt that is spread whenever we say, well, climate change is an issue that is debated in the literature. Not all scientists believe in climate change. This is not spreading a false news. This is spreading doubt. This is spreading a very nuanced kind of ignorance, because it is making apparent the idea that, well, there is a debate in which there are two factions that have the same power. Faction that believes that climate change is real, and faction that claims that climate change is not real. In reality, we don't have this kind of debate, because we have maybe a couple of scientists that are not in line with the dominant view that says that climate change is real and is caused by human actions. And by saying something correct, just enough correct to spread doubt, we are creating space to, well, make people believe easily, or at least more easily, in fake news, conspiracy theories, and so on and so on. Now, enough depressive thoughts, at least on that level. Ignorance as a limitation has numerous disadvantages. As your colleague was saying, though, ignorance as a limit could bring us to some, well, more lighter discussion. In this,
Selene,
yes.
I have a question still on
Absolutely.
the no or not.
Yes.
Because for me, this is all new. But an example of a known unknown,
Yeah.
is a mathematical equation.
Absolutely.
You have placeholders, you don't know what is the value of x.
Yeah.
But you don't know it. But in that sense, why is that a limitation? It's just a placeholder. It's not so much ignorance, but
Well, it's a limitation that you overcome when you solve the equation.
so in that sense.
In that sense, it's a limitation for you. It's not a limitation for the world. I mean, one thing I didn't say about ignorance in this context, and I mean, this is just one way to discuss ignorance. Is not the only way, but one way to discuss ignorance is to discuss it from the point of view of the subject. Who's ignorant?
And then, what is the limitation to surpass, so to speak, in the smoking?
In the smoking example, is a limitation I impose myself. I will not look for information regarding the danger of smoke. I will not look for.
But I know it exists.
Absolutely.
And there's evidence.
Absolutely. In that sense, it's a known unknown in many ways. I'm not saying that all limitation is known unknown. I'm not saying that all ignorance as a limit is an unknown unknown. This is not a claim that I'm making, even though I admit that the design of the slide can be confusing in that respect. I think that some known unknowns are a limit, and some unknown unknowns are ignorance as limitation. On that regard, you're completely right. I mean, it's perfectly true. limit and limitation are useful to me in order to discuss, well, how can we speak about the value of ignorance from one corner to the other? So to just understand that from one corner to the other, and we are going to see maybe at the end of the hour, but we are going to get there. We will see that not all known knowns are good or are should be recounted as valuable in an ethical sense and sociological sense or something like that, and not all unknown unknowns are problematic. But yes.
Finish first and then.
No, I was. Thank you.
Okay,
Was finished.
so I was just wondering.
Yeah.
Because it is not clear to me how acknowledge lies in this quadrant.
And ontology.
Yeah, because
Yeah.
as I understand, we're saying that limitation or the
Yeah.
knowns and knowns were some kind of self-extension, something provoked by the same agent. But acknowledge is more like when someone or group of people come
Yes.
together to say we are going to create ignorance.
Yeah.
So I don't know, I don't see how it lies there.
Now, ontology is concerned with how we produce actually knowledge, ignorance for others. You're completely correct. I discussed the idea of willful ignorance as an ignorance as a limitation because it's self-imposed. I'm not saying that there are, agnotology doesn't deal just with the one part of the quadrant or another. It deals with both. Indeed, when thank you for telling me that because I'm starting to realize that this could be a very poorly made slide, but limitation and limits are not. A limitation is just not only known unknown, and a limit is not just unknown unknowns. Agnotology and the epistemological reflection on willful ignorance in many ways deal with both. Yes, please.
I was thinking that, in fact, agnotology does cover a lot of the quadrants of the map.
Yeah.
Because constructed ignorance is just one of the types of ignorance that Proctor argues for, just
Yeah.
like the most important and the most, I don't know, like popular.
Yeah.
But he also talks about ignorance as a virtue and ignorance as a lacuna, like a
Yeah.
So I was thinking that in fact that knows as limitation also fits with the limitation as a construct because it's a limitation imposed by someone else.
Absolutely.
Limitations as a word can also apply when I limit someone as you can touch my things and I put this limit. This is a limitation. So I'm arguing for your case because I think that no as a limitation also works as socially or politically imposed limits. Limit and limitation is like it has this double-edged sword. But I get what you're saying.
I'm very happy that is something that is very that is something understood. Yes, thank you so much for this comment. Just to make a very quick example, even if we could talk about it for some time. A limitation, an ignorance as a limitation that relies on unknown unknowns is what Mills calls white ignorance. So an ignorance that is systematic. It belongs to both ethnic, all groups, all ethnic groups in a particular community, and it relies on the fact that white people do not simply engage with race issues if they can. And in many ways, this is not just a bottom-up problem. It's not in many ways, but I don't want to put too much emphasis on that. But in many ways, it is not the fault of individuals. It is a fault of the system, and it is a fault of the structure that we have, something like white ignorance. But this is just one example. Thank you very much for your comment. Is okay. I can go on. I can go on with the ignorance as a limit. Now, we have discussed ignorance as a limitation. We're going to go back on that by the end of the presentation, because so far I've just described to you the negative sides of ignorance as a limitation. I've not I've not show you the bright side of ignorance as a limitation. Ignorance as a limit instead is already more nuanced for everyone. I mean, every time we think about Socrates and the idea that I don't know, I know that I don't know, we are talking about ignorance as a limit. Of course, ignorance as a limit is not just a good thing. It can imply also problematic limits that we cannot overcome. One problematic limit, for example, is the Dunning-Kruger effect. I'm not sure if you are all familiar with the Dunning-Kruger effect. It has been proven in some areas, not in all, but it relies on a very simple principle that when we are learning something and we are at the first stages of the learning process, we do not know how to measure our competence. So we overstate our competence. We think that we are very much more competent than we actually are. And when we get more competent, we look at our past self and laugh maniacally, because we know that we were foolish in thinking that. The idea of Dunning-Kruger effect also connects well with a concept, a philosophical concept that relies on a similar thing. This philosophical concept is the idea of epistemic bubbles. Epistemic bubbles is a concept that has been described in many ways. One of the description of the epistemic bubble is the idea that we cannot distinguish well between knowing something and believing that we know the same thing. So just to make a very simple example, I believe I know my flight leaves at 10 o'clock. I don't know that there is a technical problem that will make my flight leave at I don't know, 4 in the morning. I will go to the airport way before 10 o'clock, because in my mind, well, I know that my flight is leaving at 10. From a phenomenological point of view, I cannot distinguish the fact that I believe in something or the fact that I know something. And in that sense, I can believe false thing sincerely. I can have simply false belief that I believe they are true. And in that sense, we cannot overcome these limits. I mean, there will not be a way for me, just me, to know that I'm believing a false thing if I don't check, for example, the timetable of the plane. But if I check the timetable of the plane, I'm not believing that I know something. I am already doubting myself. Another type of ignorance as a limit is very popular in sociological discussion, and is pluralistic ignorance. So what is pluralistic ignorance? It basically is the phenomenon in which we are part of the majority of a group in which the majority of people is against one norm or one rule. And at the same time, this majority of people doesn't express this disagreement. And so they believe they are the only one not agreeing with that particular rules. We can make a simply example and we can make a less silly example of pluralistic ignorance. The silliest example is the conference that one day was held by Jacques Derrida. Jacques Derrida went and did a conference in I don't remember where actually, but it was a conference in English, and spoke at length about cows. So the problem of cows, the fact that there was too much cows, and nobody batted an eye. They were very confused, of course. It was a very serious conference, and one of the biggest philosophers there kept discussing about cows. And only at the end of the conference, one of the other speakers realized that, well, the French philosopher was using a very French accent in saying chaos and not using the right word. So for the length of the conference, no one dared to speak. And all the people just thought, well, I'm not ready to talk about cows, but it must be a very interesting topic in philosophy if he's talking about it the length. This is pluralistic ignorance as its finest. A less silly example regards again climate change, because I don't know if you are familiar with a project that is called 89% project, but it's a project made by some activists in the climate change literature. Because most of us don't know that we are part of a majority. We are part of the group that wants to fight climate change. This has been measured by different studies. One of the studies was done by Nature. And in this study, the problem was not the fact that the majority of people didn't believe in climate change, didn't know enough about climate change, didn't do enough about climate change. On the contrary, most of people believe that we should do more about climate change. The majority of people believe the fact that every country was not doing enough about climate change, that we should unite more to fight climate change, and so on and so forth. At the same time, that majority of people didn't believe that there was a majority of people. They believed that only a small group of people believed in the same thing. So the 89 project tries to fight exactly this kind of pluralistic ignorance. This pluralistic ignorance that in the most silly examples make us realize that maybe we should speak about the cows more. In the worst example, well, brings about little political change regarding some very important issues. Now, if we look at the individual, if we look just at the subject, we see Dunning-Kruger effect, epistemic bubble, and pluralistic ignorance as a limit, as something that by ourselves we cannot solve. If we see the subject interacting with people, if we see the subject in a way continuously doubting themselves in order to find out if their beliefs are actually true, or if their competence is actually measured by their standard, or if they are in a majority or in a minority in a particular group, well, we have a different thing. We have not so much as a limit, but as a limitation. It still is an individual limit. It is not a limit if we talk about collective subject, collective cognition. In this sense, we should briefly, we have not time to speak about epistemic agency and epistemic autonomy, but maybe we can talk about it in the Q&A. Sorry, I just look at the phone and maybe I should speed up a little. Keep in mind that the distinction, because I think it's interesting. Anyway, as a limit, ignorance, of course, does not just represent a problem, but it can also represent a resource. Stuart Firestein is a biologist who has described ignorance as not only the starting point of a research, of scientific effort, but also the product of scientific effort. To make a very simple example of how ignorance can represent a way to fuel science and well, the creation of knowledge. In 1793, Edward Jenner was a physician who was working on the first type of vaccine for smallpox. When he found out that the vaccine was successful, he didn't stop there. The next question were, how much is it effective? How much, for how long this vaccine will work? In which sense that, in which cases that vaccine would work, and in which cases that vaccine would not work. In that sense, a very successful scientific project developed because it was fueled by more specific questions that emerged in its wake. Another kind of ignorance as a limit that is also productive is what Maria and Moises have described as ignorance of theoretical structure. In this fantastic paper, they basically argue for the idea that ignorance and understanding are not incompatible, but they can work together, especially if, well, in a scientific context, subjects are tackling what they name as ignorance of theoretical structure. So ignorance of, if I'm not mistaken, please correct me if I'm wrong, of the causal connection between different, theoretical principle and important principle in a particular theory. Ignorance of theoretical structure is not something that we simply overcome. We tackle it and we can get to what they call total understanding. And at the same time, we know that ignorance of theoretical structure can remain there if the theory evolves and if the theory changes. Okay, so at least.
Yeah.
Okay. The answer is here is problematic in many ways, but another that is not here that talks also about ignorance as a limit is Samantha Copeland, who is instead referring to the fact that well, most of our relationships are based upon relationship of ignorance and epistemic dependency. If I have an ear infection, I will not undergo 6 years of medicine and 4 of specialization just to cure my ear infection. I will go to the doctor. I ask for a way to heal my ear infection, and I will remain ignorant. I will remain ignorant of alternative therapies. I will remain ignorant of why that particular therapy works. This is not a limit that defines what I'm capable of. Of course, I could apply to a medical school, I could get a medical degree, I could resolve this kind of ignorance. I don't because I don't have time. I don't because I did not choose this particular path for myself. And since I did not choose that particular part of myself, since I don't have infinite time, infinite possibilities, infinite information, some knowledge will remain outside of my area of expertise, and some ignorance will remain a limit. Now, I'm almost at the end of the talk, and we still didn't get to good type of ignorance, some productive kind of ignorance, some happy kind of ignorance. In order to do that, we need to readdress something that we have already discussed, the idea of ignorance as a limitation, but a limitation that is welcome and that is preserved. And in that sense, ignorance can represent a very good limitation to have for different reasons. For example, to keep a fair judgment. The idea that placebo trial, for example, or peer reviews process happen in a double blind design is because we don't want to be biased. We don't want to fall prey of our conception, of our prejudice. And we want to keep a fair judgment on what we are going to do or what we are going to judge. The epistemologists of ignorance deal with this kind of ignorance, and in a way, they deal with the fact that we preserve ignorance also for very ethical reasoning sometimes, ethical motivations sometimes. Another kind of ignorance that we want to preserve is the right not to know or the right not to share. When we talk about privacy, we are talking about this kind of ignorance. We are talking about the fact that we don't want other people to know something of ourselves. And at the same time, we are remaining ignorant about their thing that want to, the thing that they want to keep private. At the same time, a very silly example regarding this kind of ignorance is the spoiler. We don't want to get spoiler by at the beginning of a movie because we want to remain ignorant of it until the end of the movie. Finally, and this is more problematic, ignorance can appear as a virtue in particular areas of research. For example, I think it's debatable whether we want to create a conscious artificial intelligence. Do we want, if not a conscious artificial intelligence, an artificial intelligence that can feel pain? Why do we want to create something like that? At the same time, we know that in medical fields, there are some things that we cannot know because we don't want to go through the process, the medical experimentation to know those things, because it would be painful for the subject, it would be unethical for the physicians, or it would be simply too risky for the participants to the trial. Finally, whenever we talk about virtuous ignorance, at least in in the epistemology of ignorance discourse, we think about some group of people that we want to keep ignorant until they're prepared to face some knowledge. Children are one of the finest example. We don't want children to know about death, for example, too early, sex too early, or something like that. Now, if we start to discuss ignorance as a virtue, and we start discussing the fact that, well, we could remain ignorant of some things and be better for it, then some open questions remain there to, well, to challenge some of our assumptions. Some open questions that are still, well, that are still discussed in the literature regards, for example, political correctness. In many ways, political correctness is a way to preserve a certain kind of ignorance. Do we want that? Is it a virtuous kind of ignorance? I think the debate regarding political correctness is a good debate because it implies the idea that, well, not all ignorance comes as a cost, as a price, but some ignorance is welcomed, and it should be welcomed for good reasons. At the same time, it is debatable regarding what kind of ignorance are we preserving. Are we preserving unknown unknowns, or are we preserving unknown unknowns? So are we keeping ourselves informed in the debate just because we are politically correct, or we are just taking the easier route, easiest way around one particular problematic concept? Another problem regards the rights of not being informed. A right not to be informed is especially important to be discussed, at least in any kind of democracy. The concept of democracy relies on the idea that citizens should be informed. I mean, a good democracy is a democracy in which citizens are well informed regarding the programs, for example, of the parties, the system in which the system through which we elect those parties, how the government is connected to this election, how can we change the structure of the government, and so on and so forth. At the same time, nobody has time to be completely informed in order to elect somebody. We need to choose. We need to choose who to trust. We need to choose on which particular topic we can create some level of expertise. So if there is a debate over healthcare, it's probable that the majority of people will not be so informed about the economy, but it will be informed about healthcare. But in an election, we are voting for someone who will take care of both healthcare and the economy. So the problem is right now, if before an election we will not be able to be completely informed, how rational is our ignorance before that election? And what is the threshold to say, well, I'm enough informed to vote for somebody? This is not an easy question to ask. And in the ignorance studies literature, it has claimed, it has been claimed that different options are available. Almost all of them are aimed at a reformulation of democracy as we think of it now. So if you want to get to that particular question, we're going to well have some fun conversations.
Something like 6 minutes.
This is my last slide, and the last point that is still debated in the literature regards taboos. So let's get let's discuss of the scientific context. Let's say that we are going to maintain ignorance, we are going to preserve ignorance regarding all topics that require, I don't know, unethical methodology or problematic methodology or dangerous methodology and something like that. Can we consider some goals of the research dangerous, problematic, or simply unethical? Just to make an example that has been debated in the literature, there is a literature that there is an area of research that is called the area of the cognitive differences. So it's a part of psychological and cognitive science research that is interested in establishing whether there are cognitive differences between a group of people. So if there is cognitive differences between male and females, if there is a cognitive difference in the, I don't know, mathematical reasoning of Caucasian or African American people, or if there is cognitive difference about the span of attention of young people, old people, and so on and so forth. As far as you can think in these terms. Now, would we want to know if, I don't know, females are more empathic than males? Do we want to know that? If we get to that information, what are we going to do with that? And if we come also to the conclusion that there is no difference in that particular respect, are we going to use that information at all? Are we going to publish that paper? Because a paper that doesn't find a good difference, well, is not going to be so popular in the literature, right? And if we find a difference, well, the problems are sociological, are not just psychological, are cultural also. Are you going to hire someone who belongs to a group that, I don't know, has a lower attention span of another group? These are questions that are open in the literature, because some scholars like Janet Kurani has argued for the maintenance of some taboos in the scientific context. Who's calling? Janet Kurani. Thank you.
Because as you may know, Philip Kitchen also addresses those kind of
Yeah.
Interesting.
And Lorenzo has published a book that is called Knowledge as Duty. So it's another, completely another, well, argument there. Absolutely. This is all I wanted to say for this hour. And thank you a lot for your attention. In this regard, you've been so patient with me. Thank you.
everybody, Mrs. May I ask you to turn those lights on so people can get some light? Questions, please? Guadalupe, sorry, I don't know your name.
Is Benito.
Benito? Okay, so Guadalupe first.
Thank you very much, Elena, for your presentation. It was a really interesting presentation of the problem. I didn't know as much as about it. My question, of course, not to question the importance of the subject, but I'm interested in thinking how these distinctions between degrees of ignorance and ways that we can conceptualize that could be important for some problems, especially in scientific knowledge and philosophy of science. I can see, for example, in Oresques, how she tried to thinking about how this distinction could help us to understand this. For example, the distinction between a negationist and a person who doesn't know and bad intentions behind that and this critic of science. But can you tell me a little more about the relation between these fields of the epistemic studies about symbological studies about ignorance and other problems in fields of science? You mentioned some at the end, but if you can thank you.
So epistemologies of ignorance deal with the ignorance that is produced in the scientific knowledge, is maintained in the scientific knowledge, or we want to preserve in the scientific knowledge. They mainly use a tripartite distinction of the kind of ignorance. They describe an active ignorance. So when, for example, negligent use of scientific methodology brings out false result, that is a creation of an active ignorance, is a creation of I don't know, false data or misinterpreted results that may serve the purpose of the scholar who has created that. One very simple example is Andrew Wakefield, that was responsible of the study that connected vaccine, the MMR vaccine to autism. That study was completely, was absolutely problematic from an epistemological point of view. There were just 12 children. It was a cherry picking process. The one which brought those children as participants and so on and so forth. So that is active ignorance. Passive ignorance is the one that has been described also by Firestein as the limit, which we keep pushing back through scientific understanding or the scientific process. The fact that we keep asking more questions. And then there is virtuous ignorance. And virtuous ignorance is the one I mentioned at the very end of the speech, and it's debatable. I mean, it is debatable whether it should be a virtuous ignorance as Kurani describes it, or there should be no taboos in scientific context. But this is an open question in the discussion.
Have you worked on these subjects, ignorance and Zionism?
A bit. I've not worked. I want to work on virtuous ignorance because I think it's particularly interesting. I mentioned active ignorance and passive ignorance in some papers, but I did not deal with those two concepts too closely.
Thank you.
Selena, before moving to the next question, could you stop sharing your screen on Zoom, please? On Zoom.
So
Now, Bento, please.
Yes.
I guess, is it? Yes, I think it is. Okay, that's perfect. No worries.
Okay, so thank you for the excellent presentation. I would like to hear more about this epistemic aphasia because
Sorry?
this epistemic acacia.
yes.
Yes, because it's interesting because in the Augustinian tradition, there is this, there are two consequences of the original sin, which is exactly the aggression
Yeah.
and ignorance. It is exactly that, and it is mixed now.
Yeah.
And I would like to hear more about this type of concept, or if is a concept, or if it's just two words that are together in your exposition. And the other one is this idea, this very interesting idea of unknown unknowns, because I'm thinking a lot about the famous concept of invisible ignorance, which is not so important for him, but afterwards this concept was very, very important. It was very used, and including here in the Americas in general, this was a very important concept. And I was thinking, you showed us a lot of very important and interesting concepts, but I have the impression that there's not a strong connection with the tradition,
Yeah.
as if this area or this field was completely new. And I don't know if this is exactly like that, because I think that in the tradition you mentioned Socrates, of course, and but there are a lot of thinkers that are considering these concepts, and I would like to hear more about why do you think that there are a lot of concepts, that are opening this new area, although the tradition was already going on with that. Yeah. So
Thank you so much for those very excellent questions. First, in a way, the quickest one about aggression. I didn't mention just aggression, but epistemic aggression, because there is a debate in the literature regarding the idea that aggression is always connected to a form of ignorance. I'm not sure. I'm really honest about it. I'm not sure that we cannot separate the two things. For example, a typical example of aphasia is I should not eat a cake in front of me because I will, I don't know, the cake is with nuts. I love the cake with nuts. At the same time, I'm allergic to that. It will be a problem for me if I ate one slice. But my will is too weak. So I eat one slice of cake and I go to the other. Now, does that particular case of aggression involves ignorance? I don't think so. So here I presented the idea of epistemic ignorance. It has been defended in the literature. It's not a concept that I created. It is much more focused on the fact that sometimes we just preserve our states of ignorance because getting some knowledge is too costly, or we perceive the acquisition of knowledge as costly. So it would not be costly in a material sense, it would not be costly in a time-consuming sense. I could, getting back to the example of a smoker, it would not take me much to go to the internet and say and type danger of smoking and get a very definite and gross picture of what would happen to me if I keep smoke. At the same time, if I don't do that, I just keep my bubble around me regarding the fact that it will not happen, nothing will happen to me and I can keep smoking without problems. This is just a way to say aggression and epistemic aggression are two different concepts. Some authors argue for a more blended idea of them. Now for the more complex one. Ignorance has not been, ignorance has not been born yesterday. It's not like it's a new concept. It's not new in philosophy, but it's not new in sociology as well. At the same time, it was not the central focus of the majority of scholars who worked on philosophy, on cognitive science, on psychology until very recently. Which is a way of saying, for example, that some scholar, I don't remember the name of the scholar, the philosopher who coined this phrase, who, for example, used the concept of negative knowledge regarding God, the fact that we don't know anything about God, and this kind of ignorance is so absolute that can actually be telling something about God. Well, that particular scholar was a medieval scholar, was not interested in speaking about ignorance. He was interested in speaking about God. Ignorance was just a way to discuss it. And in many cases, when we think about the philosophical tradition or the history of philosophy, the history of psychology also, we don't have the focus on ignorance. Now in ignorance studies, we are getting there. We are seeing ignorance is what we are dealing with, what we are interested in about all the other topics that come with ignorance are not the focus. We are just interested in understanding how we ignore or we are ignorant about something, which is a different perspective in a way about the same topic. But thank you very much for this question.
So Carlos, then Fernanda, then Areli, and Annette. Yeah.
Yeah.
Carlos.
So thank you very much for your interesting presentation. It was really provocative. I have a question just out of curiosity, because I really love the starting point of not thinking knowledge as a binary state or thing. And I really love that Cartesian representation of 4 quadrants. And I could not stop thinking about the 4 methods of setting belief peers.
Yeah.
And I find like something of parallel between the limitation and limit for the method of authority and method of tenacity.
Yeah.
So I would like to know if there is some work exploring that, or just to hear your opinion regarding that.
Now, this is a fantastic question. Thank you, because the concept of epistemic bubble, which describe a limit, at least an individual limit of our states, our epistemic states, ignorance as a limit in that sense, was described by a logician, John Woods, who based that particular reflection on Peirce's ideas on epistemology, on the idea that, for example, belief and doubt are 2 states that when we believe something, we are not in doubt, and vice versa. And according to Woods, already for Peirce, there is a state of ignorance as a limit. So something that we cannot overcome if not with the interaction with the environment or the interaction with other agents. And I think it's true. I think that it's a neat connection. If you read the paper on epistemic bubbles, there is, I don't remember if at least half the paper or something like that dedicated to Peirce. So the connection is absolutely there.
Write the name, please.
Oh, yes, sorry.
Thanks. Thanks.
Absolutely.
Fernanda?
So yes, do you hear me
Yes.
well?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so I have a question about the crash course and ignorance. And this let me thinking about if we take this concept of rationality of a problem solving and a decision making we make. What happened with ignorance there? Because it seems that if I take in some way a decision with rational thinking, what is going to happen? Because I will ignore the other way. Or if I take the other way, it's the same thing. So what do you think about these two concepts being matched? What will have to match?
Well, thank you so much for this question, because the idea of rational ignorance has been, well, wrote about in the literature multiple times, but it's still a very strange concept. It's still, in a way, a raw concept. So the case you are describing, we are choosing one decision, not the others. Well, the others in a way represent for us a state of ignorance as a limit. We cannot choose every possible alternative, so we need to remain ignorant of the ones we do not choose. At the same time, this is one part of the answer. Another possible answer to your question is how can we define rational ignorance, or what kind of ignorance can be defined as rational? If we talk about the case of the ear infection, well, the rational ignorance is the idea, the rational ignorance is follows from the decision to go to the doctor and not apply to medical school. But if we think about rational ignorance and election and how we get to be informed before the election, then the concept becomes blurry, because how much should I be informed? How much should I be ignorant about who I'm going to vote for, or who I'm not going to vote for? So I mean, the unfortunately there is no definite answer to your question. It's still a point of debate in the literature, but thank you for the question.
So just a reminder, there is Aurelie, Rinette, and then Jose Antonio. Aurelie, please.
Yes, on your work, how are you dealing with ignorance in the sense of as group level or agent level? Because there are several ways of dealing with the same concept. So which is yours, or which are you more partial to?
Unfortunately, I've so far dealt with ignorance from an individual level. I think it's very, well, is a flawed perspective. It's something that I should overcome, and I should discuss ignorance from a collective level or a group level instead of an individual problem. It's not just my approach, but it is the dominant perspective in ignorance studies to focus on the individual, not to focus on the group. I think we can move forward, and I think we can move past from an individual description or a discussion of ignorance in order to complicate things a bit and make it also more interesting. So thank you for the question. It's something that we should work on. I think the collective ideas on how ignorance affects groups or collective and not just individuals.
Rinette, please.
Yeah, I might be, I may be like nitpicking, but I heard you use the term wanting and shooting about to know or to not know something.
Yeah.
I was wondering about if there is an ethics implication there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I'm not an ethicist. I'm far from ethics as almost possible in my research. At the same time, I think that this is going to well, is going to bite me in the ass sometimes, because ethics cannot be completely taken as a problem aside from epistemology. And when we are discussing about ignorance, I think ethics should be involved, more involved at least than it is now. Philosophical studies on ignorance, ignorance studies as philosophical effort has been so far divided. So there are ethicists who deal with ignorance, and there are epistemologists who deal with ignorance. There is not much exchange. There should be, I think, but I'm not. I'm also to blame here because I'm not dealing with that in the first place. So probably we should do it collectively.
Yes, because I was thinking about how wanting might not be a thing. I mean, if you ask me if I want to know something, because I love gossiping around. Yes, I will answer yes. But if I should gossip around about other persons or my own things, I don't know. I know I shouldn't.
Yeah, of course.
And there I find some problems where with regarding how I would use ignorance, or how I would use usefully ignorance.
Well, the problem is I'm not an expert on ethics. I think there should be something like an ethic of ignorance. I'm not the right person to start that, but I think there should be a broad discussion over the entitlement that we feel sometimes regarding knowledge, and the fact that not all knowledge that we are entitled to should be claimed or should be pursued. I'm not going to say any more to that because I'm not, unfortunately, an expert on that. But I think it's a good. It's a good question because I think there is a gap in the research that should be briefed.
Thank you. Okay, so just a reminder, there is Jose Antonio, Ulises, and Juan, and if you want to raise your hand, just raise it. Jose Antonio, please.
Okay, so my question is, so there are good types of ignorance, and even we should desire, but how can we distinguish between what we desire to ignore and what we don't desire to ignore? Because, for example, when you spoke about political correctness as a doubt, or a doubt about it is some kind of ignorance, in which way it could be a positive ignorance? That's my question. And how can we distinguish between the both types of ignorance?
No, thank you for the question because I've skipped one part of the discussion regarding ignorance that is happening in ignorance studies. So there should be a distinction, a clear distinction between ignoring and being ignorant. And in that sense, it's very much similar to the distinction between known unknowns and unknown unknowns. So if we ignore something, we truly ignore something, we don't know anything about it, and we don't even know that we are ignorant about it. If we are ignoring something, that we at least know that we don't know something about that, and we have some control, some epistemic agency over what we get, what information we get over that something, or at least we delude ourselves in thinking that we have epistemic agency in that specific regard. So this is one part of the answer to this absolutely problematic question. The second is regards political correctness. Now, unfortunately, I think the debate is still much interesting because I can see a good way to defend both sides of the question regarding political correctness. One idea that support the idea that political correctness is a form of preservation of a virtuous ignorance is the idea that well, if we don't use certain terms, if we don't use certain language, if we don't engage in some well, not just the communication, but don't engage with some topic using certain kind of language, slowly we will go past the troubles that now make those topics, for example, problematic. So the idea is we don't use now the N-word, and we are not as long as we are not using the N-word will lose power. After a while, there will no need to not say the N-word, because the N-word will be something of the past that we can just attribute to an historical perspective or something that is just way past us. There is still debate about it. The N-word is actually losing power, or we are giving it power by not using it? There is still debate on that. I unfortunately is not as much as a coward position. Mine is something I didn't dealt with from an academic point of view. I think it's interesting, and I think there are good arguments on both sides.
So Ulises, yes. And then
I was thinking in the case of epistemic vulnerability.
Yeah.
Sorry. Yes. But my question was more how many knowledge have agent to have or not to not have, because there are people to prefer to know some things, and there's people to have to prefer to know a lot of things.
Yeah.
But what is the point in we can say someone is has the right of decide to not know some things besides the consequences, and over the other hand, what is the consequences of a person who knows too much will have some consequences in that way anyway?
Thank you, because I went very quickly on the distinction between epistemic. I did not speak at all about the distinction actually between epistemic agency and epistemic autonomy. And the idea of epistemic vulnerability relies on the concept of epistemic agency. So if on one hand we have an epistemic vulnerable person, we have someone who cannot decide for himself or herself what he knows or what she knows or what she doesn't. On the other hand, we would have an ideal kind of epistemic agency. The ideal kind of epistemic agency is a person that has a perfect control over what information she or he has, and she or he is also knowledgeable enough about what she or he doesn't know, and doesn't know that doesn't know. this is an ideal kind of agent, of course. So we cannot have this perfect epistemic agency. We are always in some way epistemic vulnerable. At the same time, I think your question regards the threshold that allows us to say, well, this person is too epistemic vulnerable, or this person is epistemic vulnerable in some cases, in some areas, not in a too damaging way. Making a very simple example, a person that is too epistemic vulnerable is not just prey of fake news, is not just prey of conspiracy theories. He or she doesn't have control over his or her life, because what she knows or what she doesn't know is not in her control. I think the question about the threshold, though, is still open and can be explored. One, please.
The conference leaves me thinking about an article of yours in which you talk about thought experiments and ignorance. And it leads me to the question of what kind of ignorance do mental experiments present? And in that case, would there be an ignorance that we prefer to maintain, or do mental experiments arise precisely to try to solve problems? That is, they try to keep us away from the ignorance while keeping us in another given their epistemic limitations, but not because they are virtuous or something like that. In this case, will that ignorance still be virtuous, or is it simply a limitation given to the characteristics of mental experiments without being virtuous in reality?
You're terrible. You're using my words against me. This is really, really rude. That's a quite fantastic question. Actually, didn't think about that. I mean, I think those experiments, in a way, preserve a kind of ignorance as a limit, because we are creating a model, and any model, since it's not reality, any map is not the territory, needs to leave out some information and needs to be abstract in some way. At the same time, I'm not sure if it's a limit or a limitation. I mean, a limit, it's a limit in the sense that, of course, any model, as thought experiments are, at least in my opinion, they need to leave out some information, but which information they leave out, it's a question of the creator of the thought experiments. So I'm really not sure this one. I'm sorry. I love this question because I've never thought about the ignorance that is preserved in thought experiments as a possible limit or a limitation. And I would say that it is a limit, but I'm not sure. I would need to think about that. Thank you so much, because I will think about it at least in the next few days.
Yeah, if there are no more questions, let's thank Selene. Thank you for the we can end the broadcasting. Y como parte de el proceso burocrático de recibir dinero del posgrado, les voy a pedir a todos que pasen y para que yo les pueda tomar una foto junto a Selene y podamos probar que esto de hecho
If it's not a collective tree.
Ay, no.
Can hold this one.
Ok. Hay una persona que dejó la doctora Ana Rosa Sanz, que yo no había visto porque no estoy yo exactamente en la sala de Zoom. Pero voy a tomar foto. Y estoy diciendo esto porque necesito cerrar la sala de Zoom y la transmisión. Muchas gracias a todas las personas que sintonizaron esta transmisión de estos procesos. Una colaboración con el posgrado en filosofía de la ciencia y la doctora María del Rosario Martínez Ordaz, como siempre. Ok, bueno, creo que no había.
Era muy extraña. Gabriel, por favor,
Yo no pertenezco al posgrado, toma tu.
pero foto de todos.
No, no.
Así de como, no tengo problema.
Que salgan mis orejas y ya. Ok, termino la transmisión. Muchas gracias y hasta la próxima. Ah, mañana.